The snow had been falling since dawn, thick and relentless, blanketing the Cotswolds village in a silence so complete that Margaret could hear her own heartbeat as she stood at the bedroom window. At 72, she'd learned to measure winter mornings not by the temperature outside, but by the stiffness in her joints and the way the cold seemed to settle deep in her bones. But this morning, it wasn't her own pain that occupied her thoughts. Behind her, Kaiser lay on his bed beside the radiator, and the sound he made trying to stand, a low whimper that he tried to suppress, out of loyalty or stubbornness she couldn't say, cut through her more sharply than any winter wind ever could. "Easy, boy," she murmured, turning from the window. The German shepherd's dark eyes met hers, and in them she saw something that frightened her, an apology, as though his failing body was somehow letting her down. Margaret crossed the small bedroom, her slippered feet silent on the worn carpet, and knelt beside him despite the protest from her own knees. She ran her hand along his flank, feeling the tremor in his muscles, the way he flinched when her fingers brushed his left shoulder. This had been getting worse for months, the limping, the reluctance to climb stairs, the way he sometimes woke in the night with a sound that was almost human in its distress. "We're going to see the vet today," she told him, her voice steady even as her heart hammered. "Whatever it takes." Her eyes drifted to the nightstand, to the simple gold band resting there in a small porcelain dish. Robert's wedding ring, for 3 years since his death. It had sat there beside her own, which she still wore, 2 circles of gold that had once symbolized an unbroken promise. She'd already sold her own jewelry, the pearl necklace, the small diamond earrings Robert had given her for their 25th anniversary. But the ring she'd kept, telling herself it was all she had left of him. Now, as Kaiser struggled to his feet with her help, she realized that wasn't true. Robert's last gift to her stood before her on trembling legs, looking at her with absolute trust despite his pain. Margaret picked up the ring, felt its familiar weight in her palm, and slipped it into her coat pocket. The walk to the veterinary clinic took nearly 40 minutes through snow that reached mid-calf in places. Margaret had called ahead, and Dr. Sarah Chen had assured her they'd see Kaiser immediately. Despite the weather, each step was a negotiation. Margaret's feet finding purchase on the icy pavement while Kaiser limped beside her, his breath coming in clouds of white vapor. She remembered another winter walk 5 years ago, when Robert had still been alive, though the cancer was already stealing him by inches. He'd been too weak that day to go far, but he'd insisted they walk to the village together. When they returned, there'd been a surprise waiting, a 12-week-old German shepherd puppy, all oversized paws and velvet ears. "You'll need someone to look after you," Robert had said, his thin hand resting on her shoulder as she'd knelt in the snow, laughing and crying at once while the puppy climbed into her lap. "When I can't anymore," she'd protested. How could she handle a dog? The expense, the responsibility? But Robert had been firm. "He'll give you a reason to get up in the morning, love. Trust me." And he had. Through Robert's final months, Kaiser had been there, a warm presence at the foot of the hospital bed they'd set up in the living room. After Robert died, when Margaret had spent days unable to find the will to rise from bed, Kaiser had nosed at her hand, whined softly, needed to be walked and fed, had needed her. The clinic appeared through the swirling snow, a converted cottage with a cheerful sign that read Chen Veterinary. Surgery. Margaret's fingers closed around the ring in her pocket as she pushed through the door, Kaiser at her side. Dr. Sarah Chen was younger than Margaret's own daughter would have been. She'd be 43 now. Living in Canada with grandchildren Margaret saw twice a year if she was lucky. The vet had kind eyes and gentle hands, and she greeted Kaiser by name, kneeling to his level despite his size. "Hello, old man," she said softly. "Let's see what's troubling you." In the examination room, Margaret explained the symptoms she'd observed while Dr. Chen's hands moved carefully over Kaiser's body. The vet's expression grew more serious as she examined his shoulder and front leg. "I'd like to do a full examination, including x-rays and blood work," Dr. Chen said finally. "Given his age and symptoms, we need to rule out several possibilities. Arthritis, hip dysplasia, possibly something more serious. Whatever he needs, Margaret said immediately. Dr. Chen hesitated, and Margaret recognized the look. She'd seen it before, in the eyes of the funeral director, the hospital billing department, the property lawyer. The look that said, "This will be expensive, and I'm not sure you can afford it. Mrs. Hartley, the examination and imaging alone will be several £100s. If surgery is required," Margaret reached into her pocket and placed the ring on the examination table between them. Even in the fluorescent light, the gold gleamed softly, warmed by decades of wear. "My husband's wedding ring," she said quietly. "It's 9-carat gold, 50 years old. It should cover whatever Kaiser needs." Dr. Chen stared at the ring, then at Margaret. "Mrs. Hartley, I can't." "You can and you will." Margaret's voice was gentle but unyielding. "Do whatever he needs, please." For a moment, the two women looked at each other across the examination table, across the barrier of age and circumstance. Then Dr. Chen nodded slowly and picked up the ring with careful reverence. "I'll have my assistant bring you some tea while you wait," she said softly. The waiting room was empty except for one other person, an elderly man with a carrier beside him, from which came occasional indignant meows. He looked up as Margaret settled into a chair, and something in her expression must have invited conversation. "Yours too, eh?" he said, gesturing toward the examination room. "My Beatrice. She's 16. Kidney troubles." Margaret nodded. "Kaiser, 7. He's been limping. They become family, don't they?" The man, Mr. Peterson, he introduced himself, shook his head. "My wife passed 2 years ago. People kept telling me to get rid of Beatrice, move into one of those retirement communities. But who'd wake me every morning at 6 demanding breakfast? Who'd sit with me while I do the crossword? Who'd give you a reason to come home?" Margaret added softly. "Exactly." They sat in companionable silence after that. Two old souls who understood what it meant to build a life around a heartbeat. That wasn't human, but was no less vital for it. The wait stretched into an hour. Through the window, Margaret watched the snow continue to fall, transforming the village into something from a Christmas card, beautiful and isolating in equal measure. She thought of the winters she and Robert had weathered together in their cottage, 47 of them. The pipes that froze in 98, the year they'd been snowed in for a week and lived on tinned soup and laughter. The winter Robert had proposed, both of them barely 23, standing in this very village square while snow gathered on their shoulders. She looked down at her left hand, at her own wedding ring. Soon, it would be the only one left. "Mrs. Hartley?" Dr. Chen stood in the doorway, and something in her expression made Margaret's heart skip. Not the look of someone bearing the worst news, but not relief either. Something more complex. "Could you come with me, please?" In the examination room, Kaiser lay on the table, sedated but breathing steadily. Dr. Chen moved to a light box on the wall and clipped up an X-ray. Even to Margaret's untrained eye, something looked wrong. Small, white fragments scattered through the shoulder and upper, leg-like stars in a dark sky. "What am I looking at?" Margaret asked, though part of her already knew, already understood, with a dread that started in her stomach and spread outward. "Bone fragments," Dr. Chen said quietly. "But not his bones. These are foreign bodies, pieces of bone that became embedded in his tissue. Mrs. Hartley, I need to ask you something. Have you broken any bones in the last few years? Your arm, perhaps? Your wrist?" Margaret's right hand moved automatically to her left wrist, to the place that still ached on cold mornings. The memory rushed back with startling clarity. 2 winters ago, early January. She'd been putting out seed for the birds, had stepped onto the front path without realizing how slick the ice had made it. Her feet had gone out from under her, and she'd fallen backward. Her left arm extended to break her fall, except something else had broken her fall. Kaiser had been there. She remembered that now. Remembered the solid warmth of him appearing beneath her as she went down. Remembered his sharp yelp of pain, quickly suppressed. She'd struck him instead of the frozen ground, and his body had cushioned her enough that her wrist had only fractured, not shattered. The doctor at hospital had commented on how lucky she'd been, how a fall like that at 70 could have been catastrophic. "My wrist," she whispered, I fractured it. 2 years ago this January. Dr. Chen nodded slowly. When you fell and Kaiser tried to catch you, the impact was severe enough that fragments of your fractured bones became embedded in his shoulder and leg. He's been carrying pieces of your skeleton inside his body for 2 years. Mrs. Hartley, the room seemed to tilt. Margaret reached out, gripped the edge of the examination table to steady herself. Kaiser, still sedated, breathed peacefully on the table between them, unaware that his secret had finally been revealed. He's been in pain all this time, Margaret said, and it wasn't a question. She thought of all the walks. The mornings he still rose to greet her, tail wagging despite the stiffness. The way he still pressed against her legs when she stood too long. Still climbed the stairs to sleep beside her bed, even though each step must have cost him. All this time and he never... Dogs don't complain, Dr. Chen said gently. Especially not dogs like Kaiser. He had a job, taking care of you. Pain doesn't stop them from doing their job. It just makes them quieter about it. Margaret looked at her dog, her vision blurring with tears. She'd been holding back for longer than she could remember. Not just tears for Kaiser, but for Robert, for the relentless passage of time, for the way love demanded so much and yet never felt like enough.
Can you help him?
She managed. Yes, the surgery is delicate but straightforward. I'll need to remove the fragments, check for any infection or additional damage. With proper recovery and physical therapy, he should regain most of his mobility. He'll probably always have some stiffness, but the pain should be significantly reduced. How soon can you operate? Tomorrow morning, if you're willing to leave him here overnight? Margaret nodded, unable to speak. Dr. Chen stepped away to make notes, giving her a moment alone with Kaiser. Margaret rested her hand on his head, feeling the warmth of him, the steady rise and fall of his breathing. You saved me, she whispered, that day and every day since. And you never asked for anything in return. She thought of Robert's words. You'll need someone to look after you. But it had never been just that, had it? Kaiser had needed her too. Needed the walks, the routine, the purpose. They'd been saving each other all along. Dr. Chen returned with paperwork and, in her hand, Robert's ring. She placed it carefully on the table beside Margaret. I can't accept this, she said firmly. The surgery will cost about half what this ring is worth. I'll do it for that amount, and you can pay in installments if needed. But I won't take your last piece of your husband. Margaret looked at the ring, at the gold band that had circled Robert's finger for nearly half a century. She thought about what it represented, a promise made, kept and honored even after death, and she thought about what Robert would say if he were here now. He'd tell her to save the damn dog. No, Margaret said quietly, and Dr. Chen's expression fell until Margaret continued. I want you to sell it. Use what's needed for Kaiser's surgery, and use the rest to help other people who can't afford care for their animals. People like Mr. Peterson out there, who need their companions as much as their companions need them. Mrs. Hartley, Robert gave me Kaiser knowing I'd need him. This is what he would want. I'm certain of it. Margaret picked up the ring one last time, felt its weight, its history. Then she pressed it into Dr. Chen's hand and closed the younger woman's fingers around it. Besides, it's just a symbol. The real thing, the love, the protection, the looking after, that's still here, still breathing, still needing me to take him home and give him his supper and tell him he's a good boy. Dr. Chen's eyes were bright with unshed tears. He's very lucky to have you. No, Margaret said, looking at Kaiser's peaceful face. I'm the lucky one. The surgery was scheduled for 8 the next morning. Margaret stayed until Kaiser woke from sedation, groggy but responding to her voice. She promised to visit the next day, kissed his graying muzzle, and walked back out into the snow. The walk home felt different, lighter somehow, despite the empty space at her side where Kaiser usually walked. Her left hand was bare now. She'd removed her own ring while waiting, and had asked Dr. Chen to sell it along with Robert's. 2 rings, one purpose, to repay the debt of love that could never truly be repaid, only honored. That night, the cottage felt emptier than it had since Robert's death. But Margaret didn't let herself spiral into grief. Instead, she made herself supper. did the washing up, and sat in her chair with a book she'd been meaning to read. And as she sat there, she made plans. She'd visit Kaiser tomorrow, of course. Then she'd inquire at the clinic about the animal shelter. Dr. Chen had mentioned needing volunteers. There were other animals in need, other elderly souls, both human and animal, who might benefit from connection. The rings could help some of them. She and Kaiser could help others once he'd recovered. For the first time in 3 years, Margaret felt something unfurling in her chest. Not the obliteration of grief that would always be part of her, like a scar that ached in cold weather, but something growing alongside it, purpose, possibility, the sense that her story wasn't finished yet. The surgery went perfectly. Dr. Chen called the following afternoon to report that Kaiser had come through beautifully, that the fragments had been removed cleanly, and that he'd already tried to stand looking for Margaret. "He'll be ready to come home in 3 days, the vet said. "But Mrs. Hartley, there's something you should know. The money from the rings, after Kaiser's surgery and medication, there's quite a bit left over. I've set up a fund in Robert's name, the Hartley Fund for Animal Care. We can help at least 12 pets this year alone." Margaret had to sit down. She pressed her hand to her mouth, overwhelmed by the thought of Robert's ring, the symbol she'd guarded so fiercely, now multiplying its purpose, helping not just one dog but many, helping not just her but others who stood where she'd stood, desperate and alone, choosing between grief and love. "Robert would like that," she whispered. "I think Kaiser would too." 3 days later, Margaret stood in her cottage doorway as Dr. Chen's assistant helped Kaiser out of the car. The German Shepherd still moved carefully, but there was already a difference, a lightness to his step, a brightness in his eyes. When he saw Margaret, his tail wagged with the enthusiasm of a puppy. She knelt in the snow, never mind her knees, never mind the cold, and wrapped her arms around him as he pressed against her, whining with joy. His tail never stopped wagging. "Welcome home, brave boy," she murmured into his fur. "My good brave boy." Inside, she'd prepared his favorite meal and had set up a comfortable bed downstairs, so he wouldn't have to climb steps while he healed. But Kaiser, stubborn as ever, made it clear he intended to sleep in his usual spot beside her bed. They compromised. Margaret brought her duvet downstairs, and they'd both sleep in the living room until he was stronger. That night, as snow fell softly outside and Kaiser snored gently beside her chair, Margaret looked at her bare left hand. She'd worn that ring for 50 years. Its absence felt strange, like phantom pain. But when she reached down and rested her hand on Kaiser's head, felt the warmth of him, the realness of him, she understood something she hadn't before. Robert hadn't given her Kaiser to replace himself. He'd given her Kaiser to continue loving her in the ways he no longer could, with presence, with warm breath and solid body, with the demand to get up each morning and keep living. And Kaiser hadn't been just a gift from Robert. He'd been a gift to himself too, a way to extend his protection beyond his own life, to ensure that Margaret would never be entirely alone. The love didn't end, it just transformed. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the village in white. But inside the cottage, there was warmth and healing, and the quiet understanding that sometimes the greatest acts of love are the ones we don't recognize until we're ready to see them. Margaret closed her eyes, listening to Kaiser's breathing, feeling the weight of him against her leg. Tomorrow, she'd call the shelter about volunteering. Tomorrow, she'd start physical therapy walks with Kaiser. Tomorrow, she'd begin the next chapter of a life she'd thought was finished. But tonight, she simply sat with her dog, her companion, her unexpected savior, and let herself feel grateful for the gift of continuing, for winter that would eventually yield to spring, for love that refused to die even when hearts stopped beating, for the way life, like snow, could cover old wounds with something new and clean and full of possibility. "Good boy," she whispered one more time, and meant it as a prayer, a promise. A thank you to both her husband and her dog, to the past and the future, to everything that had been lost and everything that remained. Kaiser sighed contentedly in his sleep, and Margaret, for the first time in 3 years, felt something very much like peace.